what did you do to kind of flesh out your story here?
Sure.
What did you want to convey by making it longer and speaking about this particular time in your life and growing up and how it informs you today?
I wanted to talk about, because what I saw happening, in my opinion, and I don't know if you guys agree with this, what I see with kind of a left in its, as one friend said, embryonic stages right now, that really comes out of, in my opinion, more so the 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign. There are these two cultures that kind of fight against each other that I saw coming up in heavy music. And those are the cultures of deconstruction, which is the culture of no, and the culture of authenticity, which says, like, you can't be part of my movement because you're not cool enough, or you're not wearing the right thing, or you're not saying the right things. And I felt like those two things were kind of working against each other to nullify the movement, to grow beyond kind of a small niche milieu into the mainstream. So I juxtaposed the left with kind of the early stages of hardcore punk music.
And, what were some of the, not to spoil the whole book, but what were some of the main contrasts and connections that you found?
One of the things that I found is, like, co-optation is going to happen to your movement as you're kind of struggling for authenticity and realism. And you have to ask yourself a bigger question, which is, are you, and I say this in the book, are you raging at the machine, against the machine? Or are you raging to be a part of the machine? And one of the things that I kind of came to the conclusion, and in talking to the guys at the live show the other night, they didn't necessarily disagree with it too much, that almost this music becomes like a cottage industry for people that can't get into the mainstream. Because once they get access into the mainstream, they don't mind playing all these corporate festivals, right? They don't mind playing Vans Warped Tour. They don't mind, getting sponsorships and playing these huge corporate venues. So what was the real meaning of what they were trying to do? And then you look at a band like Nirvana. Sorry if I'm all over the place. And Nirvana, in my opinion, we can talk about grunge and how it's not a genre all day long. That's probably another show that Sam would probably prefer to be on. But they're hardcore punk. They have their roots in hardcore punk. I mean, when Kurt Cobain kills himself, Dave Grohl picks up Pat Smear from the Germs, and Chris Novoselic joins my friends in Flipper, two seminal hardcore punk bands. But you change the name and of the genre of music, and it's more easily consumable to the masses. And what you ended up seeing with hardcore punk music through grunge is kind of, we'll take the aesthetic of this music that's supposed to be so subversive and anti-establishment, and we'll sell anti-establishment.
Yeah.
And now you've commodified it. And
well, Kurt hated that. I mean, that's it is. I was a big Nirvana fan in my teenage years. I read Heavier Than Heaven, and there's a difference between nihilism and anarchy, or basically being a rebellious artist or someone speaking to these kinds of things. Because Kurt, for example, was very pro-gay, pro these social movements, but also deeply resentful of the capitalist structures that force them into certain boxes. And I guess that is punk to a degree, but then
he didn't mind the record, the major label deal. I mean, he could have stayed at Sub Pop.
And
right?
you can see that tension, I guess, between wanting that success and then also hating yourself for wanting that success too, that he embodied.
I mean, the bigger question is, it's like, why do people have to swear a vow of poverty to be authentic? Right. And that's something that happens in our world as well, where if you've reached a certain level of success, now you're no longer authentic. You've been sucked up by the establishment. But again, the culture of deconstruction, which I just kind of call the culture of no, and a lot of this music is just kind of anti-everything. And in the end, what was hardcore really? I mean, definitely there's aspects of people from the genre that had politics like Jello Biafra, but he doesn't represent every group or person in the scene as well. And you kind of have, if anything, kind of anti-consumerism is the biggest thing that you get out of that, which is kind of what you see still now. Like the best capitalism is anti-capitalism, right? Being able to sell anti-capitalism as this cool subversive thing. And to me, what you end up getting is your leftism, if you will, much like your punkness or realness, becomes a lifestyle brand.
Yeah, I think that's really clear too. In the purity test or the authenticity test that you describe. And I mean, that's awesome that you explore that in your book. I mean, what were some of the conclusions that you drew about that particular tension that can be applied to like leftists counting Bernie's houses, for example, or liberals doing so and saying that that in some way negates any of the politics?
I did recently write a piece for Damage Magazine about Ibrahim X. Kendi. And it's not necessarily about, let me pull back a little bit. I didn't want to make it about Ibrahim X. Kendi because, again, with stuff like that, it can end up being like, once the bad man's gone, then the bad theory is gone. And what he's building on is something that's been around for a while, trying to be kind of a race ventriloquist. What Kendi was able to do, though, with anti-racism was kind of kneecap the left, in my opinion. Excuse me. And he doesn't do it by himself. He actually has help from BLM. If you think about, I think it's 2015 when Bernie's on the stump trail, and he's doing a speech about Medicare and Social Security, two things that definitely greatly benefit Black people and have for some time. Before he could even start speaking, BLM gets on stage and starts yelling about racist cops. And they're pushing back against someone that they probably should be working with, since his campaign is designed to help poor and working class Black people, poor and working class everybody. But it doesn't have to them a racialized agenda. And the Democratic Party is able to see that and take that and use it in spades. And Kendi, in his How to Be an Anti-Racist book, and I think there's a little bit of true believer in him. I don't think he's a straight up charlatan that's, like a carnival barker. What he's able to do is say, there are these conjoined twins, and it's capitalism and racism. And you can't be an anti-capitalist without being an anti-racist. But the basis of the book is about his spiritual journey into anti-racism, not his spiritual journey into Marxism. And it's kind of about the hearts and minds of white people. Ta-Nehisi Coates recently said something along the lines of, if you can't accept someone's humanity, there's no bit of legislation that will fix that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. Are you trying to say the Civil Rights Act doesn't mean anything unless all the white people in the world feel a certain way about me? Abe Lincoln couldn't do the Emancipation Proclamation only until he accepted that Black people were human beings, needed to be respected to a certain level.
Yeah.
I don't really care about what's in the hearts and minds of white people. I care about the economic stability of over 40 million Black people.
Yeah, it is segmenting and divorcing, racial equality and liberation, I should say, is probably the better word for it, right? From systems of politics and systems of change and revolution. It's like, oh, this is at least in reference to the Coates argument that you're describing here. It's much more individualized, atomized. It's emotional, as opposed to being like direct results of capitalism, colonialism, structures that made things this way. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is your assessment that really hamstrings efforts of liberation when you frame things in that way?
Yeah, because first of all, you're always going to play the oppression Olympics. I've never seen a winner at the oppression Olympics, and sorry, and sorry, and then what happens is when you get away from the economic model, what you'll find is these people end up winning in the corporate sphere. And that's really what Kendi was able to do with anti-racism. You also see it with Robin DiAngelo Kelly early on. I don't know if she's still the player that she once was in the.
Well, that's literally a white person who is framing anti-racism around the sensibilities of white people.
Kendi's isn't much different, right? It's about, we have to fix the hearts and minds of these people, because if we don't get into the hearts and minds of these people, if they don't see me as a blah, 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 then we can never really tackle this thing called capitalism. And I don't believe that. When we integrated schools, it wasn't because all the white people felt okay about it, right?
Yeah.
It took state power to get in there and do it. So to assume that economic freedom is going to come from all oppressive people saying, these cats are okay. It's just silly to think that way. But because of the way our media works as well, that's kind of the narrative that we have, right? Martin Luther King's speech at the March on Washington isn't about economic freedom, which it is. It's about the acceptance of a colorblind world. And that's not what it was all about. So these guys that kind of live in this past, an almost imagined past, especially people with like Ta-Nehisi Coates. Originally in that piece, I had a very large part about Coates, which, it's 2,000 words. You can only get so much in there, because I don't think you can really talk about Kendi, BLM without talking about the rise of Ta-Nehisi Coates as well. He's kind of a integral character in that. Toure Reed talks about it extensively in Towards Freedom. I advise everybody to read that book. But he's kind of a wannabe Baldwin in a time where Baldwin doesn't make that much sense. So this idea that you have to humanize these people to understand their plight, and only then can we work towards a more just society. It sounds nice in a Hallmark movie, I guess, but the reality of it is I'd rather have, economic policy. I'd rather have jobs programs. I'd rather be trying to abolish the conditions that cause impoverished urban cores and massive amounts of homelessness. So that's only going to come through policy, not from winning the hearts and minds of racists.
Yeah, I mean, to return to Coates, because we praised him on this program recently for speaking out, calling Israel an apartheid state. I mean, and the praise was not. I mean, it's all within the context of like, this is good because Obama reads him and hopefully crap is
and also
to
put that even to greater context. One, he was hired by Jeffrey Goldberg, who was a prison guard in Israel, and very pro-Israel. And also in his reparations piece that really brought him to fame, he mentions Israel as a positive example for how reparations can be done.
Which he apologized for.
Right.
Yes, yeah. So that's growth on that front. But like so it's helpful that someone like Coates is talking about Israel as an apartheid state. That's, to get the change we need to see, I'm going to take that 100%. But when you listen to his words, there isn't really any conversation about colonialism or capitalism at all, and the structures that led to apartheid or segregation, which he likens to, obviously, segregation and Jim Crow in the United States. But why were those systems in place? Why is Israel strategically placed in that way? Why were Black people subjugated and second-class citizens and continue to be disenfranchised, not in the place that they should be due to the systems of racism? It feels like it's difficult to get anti-racist writers to take that next step, at least mainstream anti-racist writers.
Well, because there's money to be made and people really love hearing a certain narrative, right? Look, on my show, if me and Pascal said white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy all the time, we'd have a hell of a lot more viewers. We'd get some nicer messages in the inbox.
Right.
But when I wrote in the damage piece, I said, I'm from a city called Richmond, California. The city that I am from is one of the most diverse cities in America. It's pretty even across the board, right? Now, you take a Black woman that works at McDonald's, you know, fighting, making maybe a little bit more than minimum wage. The owner of that McDonald's and most of the McDonald's in the urban core of the Bay Area is Black. Most of her coworkers are going to be Black. Her mayor is Latin. Her chief of police is Black. The cops arresting the Black people robbing her are Black. Maybe even her direct boss is Black. So what is anti-racism going to do for her? Richmond, California is also one of the most impoverished cities in the state and one of the more impoverished in the nation. So what has representation done for her? What has the trickle down of Black wealth done for her? Because it hasn't trickled. If it didn't trickle down for Reagan, why is it trickling down for us? Right? Yeah. So these cats can't really get beyond that argument because, like you said, it is an impassioned one that invokes an emotion of a real past. Is it a real past that these people lived? Most of them no. Right?
Right.
Coates didn't live in apartheid America at all. But you hear him talk, you would think he did. So again, I really want to talk about the economic situation for 40 million Black folks, other than really giving a damn about how every white person feels about me in their heart. I live in a country right now where people's petty racism just doesn't matter because I have economic buying power. I get paid in the American dollar. Cops don't mess with me. The natives of the area love me. So, you know, my take on racism might be a little different than someone else's.
It's about power. I mean,
it is.
And that's
trip off this for a second, guys. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, I interrupted you first.
I promise I'll shut up after this. I would love to hear you guys' take on this. I think I said this on Matt and David's show. I was recently on Left Record. Please check that out. Around the same time as the 94 crime bill, Bill Clinton adds a sentencing requirement to hate crime law. I see you, I hear you, I feel you, Black people. Now we have this surplus population that's suffering due to deindustrialization. And the way we're going to handle this surplus population is with a massive crime bill, right? Now, the way this surplus population was able to thrive in urban areas is through the influx of cheap cocaine that's flooded into these areas because there's open air drug markets. So the government doesn't really care, right? So the government's turning a blind eye to all this cocaine. So you're talking now about like a kilo of cocaine that may cost these guys $3,000 to $5,000. And you can take that cocaine, cut it, and cook it down into crack. And now that $3,000 to $5,000 investment turns into $50,000 to $100,000. Not necessarily overnight, but probably in a couple days' time. You have an instant distribution system with gangs. And you have a captive market because of the location of where you are, right? Due to all these people that can't really move anywhere because they're impoverished. So now you're talking about street corners or apartment complexes or raggedy ass HUD homes that could be worth millions of dollars due to this product and its distribution system. And we looked at this problem for years, not as capitalism in an underground market in an illegal economy. We looked at it as wayward youth that have no fathers, right?
Another personalization of systemic problems.
And so as these kids are basically just using capitalism, right? Because they don't have the courts. Corporations can put people in litigation for months or years. These guys can't sue somebody over drug turf to take over a place. They use violence. you start recruiting more people because it is, again, it's more profitable to take over more of this turf because it's worth so much money. Now, with that quick explanation, we can understand the 90s a little bit better. But the solution to this problem becomes lock them up. So again, in 1993, Bill Clinton, we know we're going to lock everybody up. We know we're going to build more jails. We're going to hire more cops. And people in these communities are asking for this because it's the only way we know how to solve this problem. And right before it happens, he goes, I see you. Anti-racism. We're going to put an extra sentencing requirement on hate crimes because this is unfair. This is unjust.
Yeah.
And it's like, I grew up in Richmond, California, which was a violent area in the 80s and 90s. I wasn't running from the Klan. You right?
Yeah.
That's not who I was scared of. What the hell is this bill going to do for me? But everybody applauded it. At the same time, we're also massively cutting welfare. So you have surplus population, people. And the only way we know how to deal with this surplus population, people, is not jobs programs. It's build more prisons, lock these fools up. Maybe some of them will learn how to code. F it, not my problem. But is anti-racism going to fix that at that point?
Or just this is a massive problem of warehousing a surplus population that we don't provide resources or economic opportunity for. So let's also add a few more racists into that system as well, and as if that's going to like deconstruct exactly what created this.